Hello and good afternoon everyone, especially our STEAM instructor, Mrs. Losminda G. Machete. Good afternoon to you, ma'am. I am Gio Salamanca, together with my group mates, Jenlet Calipes and Roslime Simudlan. Today, we have been assigned to discuss Lesson 1, which focuses on the distinction between moral and non-moral standards. So, without further ado, let's get started. But before we proceed into the discussion, allow me to read out the learning objectives of this lesson. At the end of the lesson, students should be able to differentiate between moral standards and non-moral standards. And students should be able to understand the key characteristics that distinguish moral standards from non-moral standards. And now, let's dive into our main discussion. For you, what is morality o ano ba ang moralidad? Morality refers to the standards that a person or group has about what is right and wrong or good and evil. Accordingly, moral standards are those concerned with or relating to human behavior, especially the distinction between good and bad or right and wrong behavior. So, when we say morality o moralidad, ito ay tumutukoy sa ating mga tao in which it serves this as a guide or standards for us upang matukoy natin kung ano ba ang tama at mali, mabuti o masama. Like for example, sasabihin natin may isang taong nakasaksi na may nahulog na pitaka at walang ibang nakapansin nito kundi siya lang. So, in this situation, the person has its two options. Either, kukunin ba niya yung pitaka at ibalik sa may-ari nito, o di ba kukunin niya ito at gagamitin niya ang pera na nasa loob nito. So, magitan nito, dito na pumasok ang moralidad. Kung pipiliin ng tao na kukunin niya ang pitaka at ibalik sa may-ari, then the person demonstrates moral behavior. And if the person chooses to keep the wallet and take the money inside, so this means that the person is having lack of moral behavior. Dahil sinalungat niya ang pamantayang moral ng katapatan at integridad. Which states that it is wrong to steal or take na hindi naman yan sa'yo.
Ngayon, ating alamin kung ano nga ba ang pagkakaiba sa moral at non-moral standards. So, ano nga ba ang moral standards? Moral standard, it refers to the norms which we have about the types of actions which we believe to be morally acceptable and morally unacceptable. Specifically, it deals with matters which can either seriously harm or benefit human beings. The validity of moral standards comes from the line of reasoning that was taken to back or support them, and those are not able to form or change by particular bodies of authority. Some ethicists equate moral standards with moral values and moral principles. In other words, moral standards involves principles of right and wrong based on values such as empathy and justice. Moral standard, it is a belief of right and wrong action that is good to all, and it also a beliefs of rules that everyone's obey. Example of moral standards: theft, rape, murder, assault, fraud, and slander. Meanwhile, non-moral standard, it refers to the rules that are unrelated to moral or ethical consideration. Either these standards are not necessarily linked to morality or by nature lack of ethical sense. Basic example of non-moral standards includes rules of etiquette, fashion standards, rules in games, and various house rules. Technically, religious rules, some traditions, legal statutes, laws, and ordinances are non-moral principles, relevant depending on some factors and context. The following 6 characteristics of moral standards further differentiates them from non-moral standards. First, we have moral standards involve serious wrong or significant benefits. Moral standards deal with matters which can seriously impact that is enjoyed or benefits human beings. It is not case with many non-moral standards. For example, following or violating some basketball rules may matter in basketball games but does not necessarily affect one's life or well-being. Moral standards are principles or guidelines that govern human behavior and determine what is considered right or wrong. These standards are rooted in societal values and are often based on concepts such as fairness, justice, and respect for others. They guide our actions and choices, especially in regards to how we treat and interact with one another. Another example is that honesty. Honesty is a moral standard that promotes trust and integrity in human interaction. When individuals lie or deceive others, it can lead to damaged relationship, loss of trust, and emotional distress for those affected. On the other hand, when people act honestly, it fosters a climate of trust and cooperation which has numerous benefits for individual and society, such as stronger relationship, better communication, and overall social harmony. Remember that moral standards are concerned with the fundamental principles that guide human behavior and directly impact the well-being and rights of individuals. Second, we have moral standards involve serious wrong or significant benefits. Moral standards have overriding character or hegemonic authority. If a moral standard states that the person has the moral obligation to do something, then he or she is supposed to do that even if it conflicts with other non-moral standards and even with self-interest. So, this aspect of moral standards highlights the idea that moral obligations are not merely conditional or subject to personal choice. They are seen as having a higher and strict value that overrides other considerations. For example, if a moral standard dictates that honesty is important, an individual is expected to be honest even if it conflicts with personal gain or the expectations of others. Note that moral standards involve serious wrong or significant benefits and possess an overriding character or hegemonic authority. A person is expected to follow
moral obligations even when they conflict with non-moral standards or self-interest, as moral standards are considered to hold a higher value and contribute to the betterment of individuals and society. Third, we have moral standards are not established by authority figures. Moral standards are not invented, formed, or generated by authority bodies or persons such as the nation's legislative bodies. Ideally, instead, these values ought to be considered in the process of making laws. In principle, therefore, moral standards cannot be changed nor nullified by the decisions of a particular authoritative body. The idea that moral standards are not established by authority figures is rooted in the belief that these standards hold a higher authority than laws and regulations. Okay, for example, individual may choose to disobey unjust laws on the basis of their own moral conviction. This is often seen in cases of civil disobedience, where individuals believe that the law is morally wrong and act to bring attention to an unjust situation or advocate for change. It is important to know that moral standards can vary among individuals and cultures, leading to disagreements and debates on what is morally right or wrong. These differences highlight the subjective nature of moral standards and the need for discussions, deliberations, and ethical inquiries in order to navigate moral dilemmas and reach societal consensus.
Next, moral standards have the trait of universal civility. It means that everyone should live up to moral standards. To be more accurate, however, it entails that moral principle must apply to all who are in the relevantly similar situation. If one judge that act A is morally right for a certain person P, then it is morally right for anybody relevant similar to P. This characteristic is exemplified in the Gold Rule. Do unto others what you would them do unto you. If you were in their shoes. Next, moral standards are based on impartial consideration. Moral standard does not evaluate standards on the basis of the interests of a certain person or group, but one that goes beyond personal interest to a universal standpoint in which each person are impartially counted as equal. So, ang ibig sabihin nito na ang isang tao o kahit sino man sa atin ay dapat maging bias o may pagkiling sa pagdesisyon. Halimbawa, ang isang judge sa korte ay hindi dapat humatol batay sa pagkakaibigan o batay sa magkano ang ibayad sa kanya ng kanilang or kabilang panit. Dapat magdesisyon siya according sa kung ano at sino ang tama.
Last characteristics of moral standard is that moral standards are associated with special emotions and vocabulary. Prescriptively indicates that practical or action guiding nature of moral standards. These moral standards are generally put forth as injunction or imperatives such as do not kill, or do no unnecessary harm, and love your neighbor. So in this last characteristics is that the moral standards are connected to specific emotions and vocabulary. So this means ang moral standards ay hindi lamang isang abstract na mga konsepto, ngunit nagdudulot din ito ng ilang emosyon sa loob natin at ipinahahayag ito sa pamamagitan ng mga tiyak na salita at wika. The prescriptive nature of moral standards indicates that they are intended to guide our actions and behavior. They provide practical guidelines on how we should conduct ourselves in different situations. Halimbawa, moral standards like do not kill or do no unnecessary harm. This serves as injunctions or imperatives that directs us to avoid causing harm to others. Additionally, moral standards often emphasize the importance of love and compassion towards others. The moral imperative to love your neighbor highlights sa kalagahan ng pakikitungo sa iba ng may kabaitan, empatiya at paggalang. Overall, these 6 characteristics of moral standards highlight the unique and important role that they play in shaping our ethical decisions and guiding our behavior towards others. By understanding and adhering to moral standards, we can be able to create a more just, fair, and compassionate society for all. This is our discussion ends, and we hope that you have gained a lot of knowledge from our conversations about the difference between moral and non-moral standards. Thank you for engaging in these discussions with us.